Spain owned the gold. Everyone else owned Spain. By 1557, the Spanish Empire stretched across 3 continents. Silver poured from Potosí like rivers cutting through mountains. Galleons crossed oceans heavy with treasure, their hulls groaning under the weight of what seemed like infinite wealth. The Habsburgs ruled half of Europe, commanded the most feared infantry on the continent, and controlled trade routes that circled the globe. And Spain was bankrupt, not once, 4 times in 60 years. This is not a story about bad luck or poor management. This is a story about what happens when you confuse extraction with creation, when you mistake control of resources for control of the system that prices them, when you believe that owning the mine means owning the value it produces. Spain didn't lose the gold. The gold arrived on schedule for decades. The gold lost Spain. Because while Spanish kings counted coins in Seville, bankers in Genoa and Augsburg were counting something far more valuable, the contracts that determined where those coins would flow next, and the answer was never Spain. Most people stop at the headline. This channel exists for what comes after 1492. Columbus returns from the New World with stories of limitless gold waiting beyond the horizon. Within a generation, Spain controls the richest mines ever discovered. Potosí, high in the Andes, produces more silver than the rest of the world combined. The Zacatecas mines in Mexico pour forth streams of precious metal. Spanish conquistadors transform entire civilizations into extraction machines. For the first time in European history, a monarchy doesn't need to tax its people to fund war. It can simply extract from conquered territories 6,000 miles away. Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, builds an empire on this promise. He borrows against future shipments of American silver. Genoese bankers, German merchant houses from the Fugger and Welser families, Flemish financiers, they all line up with open ledgers. The promise is simple and seductive. The gold is coming. The mines are infinite. The empire is eternal. The interest rates are extraordinary. 12% in good times, 24% in war, 48% when Spain is desperate. But this seems irrelevant when silver mountains wait across the Atlantic. But here's what no one said out loud in the throne rooms of Madrid. The bankers didn't want Spain to pay off the debt. They wanted Spain dependent. Every loan came with conditions, repayment schedules tied to specific silver fleets, collateral in the form of tax revenues from Castile, Naples, the Netherlands, rights to mint currency, control over customs houses. Spain became the wealthiest debtor in history. And debt, unlike gold, compounds. It metastasizes. It restructures power itself. The Spanish crown believed it was renting money to build an empire. It was actually mortgaging the empire to rent the appearance of power. By the 1550s, the system is fully operational and functioning with mechanical precision. Silver arrives in Seville aboard the treasure fleet. It is unloaded, counted, taxed by royal officials, and then immediately loaded onto different ships. The destination is never Spain. It flows to Antwerp, Genoa, Augsburg, wherever Spain's creditors maintain their counting houses. 80% of incoming treasure never touches Spanish hands for more than a few hours. It flows directly through Spain to foreign banks, like water through a pipe that has no reservoir. Spain produces nothing. This is not hyperbole. Spanish manufacturing collapses within a generation of the silver boom. Why invest years developing textile production when you can buy Flemish cloth with silver? Why subsidize domestic agriculture when Baltic grain merchants accept American coins? Why build shipyards when Genoese contractors will supply vessels for the next loan payment? The Spanish aristocracy grows fat on imported luxuries. The monarchy grows desperate for the next silver fleet. The common people grow poor in a land drowning in treasure. This is not a failure of the system. This is the system working exactly as designed. Then comes the invisible weapon, inflation. Spanish silver floods European markets by the millions of ounces. It makes everything cheaper for foreigners and catastrophically expensive for Spaniards. A German merchant selling tools can now charge half the price and still profit because his costs are in depreciating silver-flooded currency. A Spanish farmer selling grain must compete with imports bought with the very silver his taxes helped extract. The treasure that was supposed to make Spain invincible is devaluing Spanish labor, Spanish goods, Spanish sovereignty. Prices in Spain quadruple between 1500 and 1600. Wages remain stagnant. The productive economy withers. Spanish cities fill with idle nobles and desperate peasants, while workshops close and fields go unplanted. In 1557, Philip II suspends all debt payments, the first bankruptcy. Financial markets across Europe shudder. Merchant banks in Genoa face immediate liquidity crises. The Fuggers, who had lent millions, suddenly hold worthless paper promises. But the bankers don't panic. They pause. They renegotiate. They extend new loans at higher rates, with stricter conditions, with deeper claims on Spanish revenues. Spain accepts, because the alternative is unthinkable. Collapse means losing the ability to pay armies. Losing armies means losing the Netherlands, Milan, Naples. Losing the empire means losing access to the silver mines. Losing the silver means permanent default. The circle tightens with every turn. Spain is trapped in a cage made of its own treasure. This is not opinion. It is economic history. The Spanish crown believed it was borrowing money to fight wars of religion and dynastic honor. It was actually fighting wars to justify the borrowing. Every conflict became a mechanism to extract more loans. The Dutch Revolt, which began in 1566 and bled Spain for 80 years, the endless wars in Italy to maintain Habsburg dominance, the catastrophic Armada of 1588 against England, financed entirely by borrowed silver that hadn't yet been mined. Each war required more loans. Each loan required collateral from future silver shipments. Each ounce of silver arrived already mortgaged to creditors 2 or 3 transactions deep. Meanwhile, the bankers never lost. When Spain defaulted in 1557, the creditors didn't write off the debt. They converted unpaid obligations into juros, perpetual bonds backed by Spanish tax revenues. These bonds paid 5 to 7% annually forever. They became the safest investment in Europe because they were guaranteed by the Spanish tax base, not by the king's promises. When Spain defaulted again in 1560, the same conversion happened, then 1575, then 1596. Each bankruptcy transferred more fiscal sovereignty from the crown to the bondholders. The creditors didn't get repaid in the traditional sense. They got ownership of Spain's revenue streams. They got first claim on tax collection in Castile, Aragon, Sicily, Peru. They got control over Spanish monetary policy because the crown couldn't debase currency without destroying the value of its own debt. Piece by piece, Spain's fiscal sovereignty was sold to foreign financiers. The monarchy retained the theatrical elements of power, the palaces, the ceremonies, the global empire, the fearsome reputation, but the bankers held the ledgers that determined what the empire could actually do. And ledgers, not crowns, determine who rules. By 1600, Spanish peasants in Castile were paying taxes to service debts incurred for wars fought before they were born. The aristocracy was tax-exempt by ancient privilege. The church was tax-exempt by divine right. The entire burden fell on those with no gold in their pockets and no voice in the councils of power. The silver kept flowing from Potosí, an endless torrent of metal extracted by forced indigenous labor in conditions that killed thousands. The creditors kept collecting their percentages, their bonds appreciating as Spanish power depreciated. Spain kept decaying from within, hollowed out by the very abundance that should have made it invincible. The system didn't fail, it succeeded for those who designed it. The bankers of Genoa retired wealthy. The fuggers became princes. The merchant networks of Antwerp and Amsterdam built commercial empires on the interest payments of Spanish desperation. Spain got an empire. The creditors got Spain. Spain never ran out of gold, it ran out of leverage. By the mid-17th century, the mines of Potosí and Zacatecas were still producing millions in silver annually. The empire still stretched across continents. The Spanish crown still ruled territories where the sun never set. But Spain had become a fiscal colony of its own creditors. Every real mined in Potosí was already claimed by someone in Genoa before it left the ground. Every tax collected in Castile was already pledged to bondholders in Augsburg. The Spanish crown had sovereignty in name and debt in reality. The collapse was not dramatic. There was no single catastrophic battle, no invasion of Madrid, no dissolution treaty. It was bureaucratic, administrative, a slow fiscal strangulation. Spanish power faded in 1,000 small concessions. Wars lost not because of tactical failures, but because mercenaries went unpaid and mutinied. Fleets that rotted in harbor because there was no money for repairs. Industries that never developed because capital flowed to creditors instead of investment. A population impoverished by the very treasure meant to enrich them, watching wealth flow through their country like a river that never stops to water the land. The lesson is not that Spain was uniquely foolish or that the Habsburgs were particularly incompetent rulers. The lesson is that resource wealth without productive capacity is a rentier's trap. Spain controlled the gold, but it didn't control the system that priced, distributed, financed, and ultimately captured that gold. The bankers did. They controlled the mechanisms of credit. They controlled the networks of trade. They controlled the knowledge of how to convert metal into power. Spain had treasure. The creditors had the system. And systems always defeat resources in the end. Wealth is not what you extract from the ground. Wealth is what you produce with your hands and minds. Power is not what you own. Power is what you owe, and to whom. Spain died rich, drowning in silver, celebrated in sonnets, feared on battlefields, and irrelevant in the ledgers that mattered. The mistake was believing the gold belonged to them. It never did. The moment they borrowed against it, it became someone else's collateral. The moment they stopped producing and started importing, they became a distribution node in someone else's commercial empire. The gold was always just passing through. This was one layer of the system. The rest is documented here at the Economic Historian.